My name is Linda Harper. I'm 58 years old, and after 24 years of loyalty, I was told I was too senior and needed to make room for fresh blood. Claire Benton, my brand new manager, said it with a practiced smile, her voice slicing through the sterile boardroom like glass. 24 years of nights, weekends, and crises discarded as overhead. I gathered my pen and my small succulent in silence, but inside, something sharp took root. Because what they didn't know was, I had already been preparing for this moment. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family or by the people who were supposed to value you most. Because this isn't just about losing a job. It's about losing 24 years of respect. And trust me, you'll want to hear how it turns out. When people ask me how I lasted 24 years in one of the most cutthroat industries in America, I usually smile and say, discipline. But the truth runs deeper. It goes back to childhood dinners in a small house in Amarillo, Texas, where my father's word was law and my mother's silence was strategy. I learned early that if you wanted respect, you didn't cry for it, you earned it, you held it. Even when it felt like your hands were bleeding. I was the oldest of 3 sisters, and maybe that's why responsibility came to me like a second skin. At the dinner table, my father would pass the meatloaf first to the youngest. By the time the platter came to me, the gravy had cooled. I swallowed resentment with every lukewarm bite. I didn't know it back then, but those tiny lessons would harden me into someone who didn't expect applause, only results. When I was 15, I worked weekends at a grocery store to save for my first used car. My paycheck went straight into a jar on the kitchen counter. One night, I found that jar empty. My middle sister confessed she had taken the money for a road trip with friends. My parents shrugged. She's young, Linda. She needs to enjoy life. I remember staring at the bare counter, heart pounding with betrayal. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just worked double shifts until I could afford the car again. I told myself I'd never let anyone hold that kind of power over me again. Years later, when I graduated from the University of Texas with a degree in business, nobody came to the ceremony except Thomas, the man who would become my husband. My parents sent flowers. My sisters sent excuses. I told myself it didn't matter. But as I stood there clutching my diploma, I promised that my professional life would never be as dismissive as my family life had been. I would make myself indispensable. In 1999, I joined Westbridge Medical Logistics. Back then, we were a small outfit renting 3 floors of a downtown Dallas building. I was 33, full of energy, determined to prove myself. On my first day, the supply chain servers crashed. Chaos reigned, phone lines jammed, hospitals desperate for delivery updates. I stayed up 36 hours straight, manually logging shipments, calling drivers, reassuring frantic nurses. When the system finally came back online, the VP shook my hand and said, "You just saved the company." That was the first time I realized my calm under pressure was more than survival. It was my edge. But the real test came 6 months later. Our first FDA audit. If we failed, Westbridge could lose half its contracts. My boss panicked. My colleagues whispered. I rolled up my sleeves and created a compliance binder from scratch, cross-referencing every delivery, every refrigeration unit, every driver certification. When the inspectors walked in, I smiled, offered coffee, and guided them through our processes like I had rehearsed it 100 times. We passed with only 2 minor notes. That night, as I drove home through the orange haze of Dallas streetlights, I knew I had found my calling. Logistics wasn't glamorous. It was survival. And I was damn good at it. The 2009 healthcare crisis nearly broke us. Orders tripled overnight, regulations tightened, and every hospital screamed for priority. I remember one week where I slept under my desk, waking to the hum of vending machines, my mouth tasting of stale coffee. My team called me the general. I barked orders, but I also worked beside them, packing crates, labeling boxes, driving shipments myself, when drivers called in sick. At 3 a.m., one morning, with pallets stacked to the ceiling, Jennifer, a fresh hire, then looked at me and whispered, "You never stop, do you?" I smiled. Not when patients are waiting. That crisis cemented my reputation. When people thought Westbridge, they thought Linda Harper, the woman who never let the system fail. Ironically, Claire Benton, yes, the same Claire who later called me too senior, was once under my wing. She came in as an intern, barely 24, nervous but ambitious. I taught her how to read shipment logs, how to negotiate with stubborn vendors, how to stand firm in compliance audits. She shadowed me during one especially brutal FDA inspection. Afterward, she looked at me wide-eyed and said, "I want to be like you." Back then, I believed her. Back then, I didn't know admiration could curdle into ambition, and ambition into betrayal. My personal life, meanwhile, was quieter but not without struggle. Thomas, my husband, taught high school history. His patience and humor were the counterweight to my steel. On nights when I came home after 16-hour shifts, he'd be sitting on the porch, 2 glasses of sweet tea waiting. "You fight wars out there," he'd say, "but here, you can rest." I loved him for that. Our daughter Anna grew up watching me juggle conference calls and bedtime stories. She used to draw pictures of me with a phone in one hand and a clipboard in the other. I worried sometimes. Worried she'd think I chose work over family. But as she grew older, she chose journalism, chasing stories with the same relentlessness I chased supply chains. "You taught me not to look away," she told me once, "not to accept the first answer." She didn't know it then, but that lesson would come back to change everything. By 2022, Westbridge had grown into a regional giant. I sat on the executive floor, a director in name but a strategist in truth. I knew every vendor by first name, every client by their quirks. When Karen O'Neill from St. Mary's Hospital called at midnight, I answered. When Morrison Health threatened to switch providers, I drove 4 hours myself to fix the relationship. People trusted me, not the company me, but in the quiet moments, I saw the storm coming. New blood in the executive ranks, more MBAs with glossy slides, fewer veterans who had survived crises. Claire's return as manager was the final omen. She had that same gleam in her eyes, but sharper now. Like she had decided the only way to rise was to cut down whatever stood in her way. I didn't know it then, but every late night she stayed at the office. She wasn't learning from me. She was calculating how to replace me. Still, I wasn't unprepared. 1 year before the axe fell, I quietly started advising MedExcel, a startup run by Marcus Lee and Stephanie Cruz, 2 brilliant minds who had once worked under me. They were scrappy, passionate, and determined to revolutionize logistics with new tech. They begged me to join full-time. I refused. I still believed in Westbridge, but I accepted small consulting work, and I insisted on equity, not cash. It felt like planting a seed in a secret garden, just in case, and that garden was about to bloom. When I think about the roots of betrayal, I realize they never start in the moment of crisis. They start years earlier, in little cracks no one notices. There was a Christmas in 2015 I can't forget. The office lights were dimmed, everyone gone home. I was still there, checking shipments for a children's hospital in San Antonio that had run out of cancer meds. Snow, or as close as Dallas gets to snow, was drifting outside. My phone buzzed, Thomas sending a photo of Anna by the tree, both of them waiting for me. I stared at it, the warmth of that picture burning in my palm. I told myself one late night was worth it if it meant children had their medicine by morning. But deep down, I felt the cost. I didn't know it then, but sacrifices like that would one day be used against me, twisted into too senior, too slow, too set in your ways. There were other moments. I remember a company retreat in Houston. Claire was just a rising star then, presenting a flashy PowerPoint on modernizing supply chains. People clapped politely, but when her software projections crumbled under simple questions, she froze. I stepped in, smoothed the edges, reframed her numbers in ways that made sense. Later, she thanked me with a tight smile. "I owe you," she said, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, the sting of being saved publicly. I didn't know it then, but she'd carry that humiliation like a splinter. The years rolled on. Westbridge grew fatter, top-heavy with executives who measured value by quarterly reports, not by sleepless nights spent averting disasters. More and more, I found myself being the bridge, translating corporate speak into ground-level action, holding together a company that thought spreadsheets could replace experience. One of my proudest achievements was the Henderson Protocol. 5 years ago, a near disaster with temperature-sensitive meds almost cost us a federal contract. I devised a flexible compliance strategy, half science, half instinct. It wasn't written in any manual, but it kept inspectors satisfied every single time. Claire once shadowed me during an audit when I used it. She scribbled notes furiously, but I could tell she didn't grasp it. To her, it looked like bluff and charm. To me, it was 20 years of understanding inspectors, reading their eyes, knowing when to volunteer extra data and when to hold back. That kind of knowledge doesn't live in a binder. It lives in blood. I can still picture the look on Thomas's face the first night I told him I might be replaced. It was spring 2022, and Claire had just been promoted. We sat on the back porch, fireflies blinking in the warm Texas dusk, the smell of cut grass heavy in the air. She's smart, I admitted, but she doesn't understand the bones of this industry. She thinks compliance is a checklist. She thinks clients are numbers. Thomas sipped his iced tea, eyes thoughtful. And you think she's coming for you? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He reached across the table, took my hand. Then don't fight her words with words. Fight her with results. Fight her with what she'll never have, your history. That advice stuck. It shaped every choice I made in that last year. I documented contacts. I nurtured relationships. I spent weekends with Marcus and Stephanie at MedXL, not just advising but building. They offered me a contract. Chief Operating Officer, equity partner, full decision-making power. I tucked it away in my desk drawer at home, under a stack of bills. Insurance, a weapon, if the day ever came. That day came sooner than I thought. One memory stings sharper than most. Just a month before Claire fired me, Jennifer, the same woman I had hired fresh out of school, came to my office. She looked pale, her voice low. Linda, I think Claire's making cuts in places she doesn't understand. She canceled our vendor renewal with MedFarm, said she had a cheaper alternative, but the new vendor has a record of late deliveries, and worse, rumors of kickbacks. I told her to document everything, to protect herself. Jennifer nodded, but I saw fear in her eyes. Later, she would resign, unable to stomach Claire's brand of leadership. At the time, I didn't realize how prophetic her words were. Flashbacks have a way of tying threads together. Anna, my daughter, was one of those threads. As a business reporter, she often called me for context. Mom, is it true companies cut experienced staff to save money? Does it really work? I'd laugh bitterly. It works on paper, not in reality. She'd type notes, her journalist instincts sharpening. I didn't know it then, but Anna's questions weren't idle. She was collecting, building her own arsenal. And then there was Mrs. Howard, my neighbor. She's the kind of woman who notices everything from her front porch packages, arguments, even who's home late. One day she asked me, "Still running that company?" I smiled wearily, "Still holding it together." She patted my arm. "People forget, but they'll remember when you're gone." I laughed at the time. Later, her words would echo like prophecy. The final flashback before the fall was a conference in Houston. Industry giants gathered, everyone strutting like peacocks. I wasn't presenting, just networking. But the whispers reached me anyway. Westbridge is losing its edge. Too old-fashioned. They need new blood. I smiled through it, shook hands, made my rounds. But inside, I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. I told myself it was just noise. I told myself 24 years couldn't be erased by one MBA with shiny shoes. I was wrong. Looking back now, every late night, every sacrifice, every time I chose company over family, it all stacked up. Preparing me for the moment, Claire looked me in the eye and told me I was too senior. If I hadn't lived through the humiliation of childhood dinners, through sisters stealing my hard-earned savings, through bosses collapsing under pressure while I stood firm, I might have broken. But I didn't. Because while Claire saw an old director past her prime, I saw something else. I saw the long game. I saw MedXL waiting in the wings. I saw Anna sharpening her pen. I saw the clients who still called me, even when my title said operations director and not savior. The flashbacks are more than memories. They're maps. And every map led me right here, to the brink of war. What Claire didn't know, what nobody at Westbridge knew, was that I had already laid the groundwork for my revenge. The first cracks showed the week after I was gone. Jennifer called me in hushed tones one evening, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone trying to patch holes in a sinking ship. "Linda, it's chaos. Claire cut the MedFarm contract entirely. The replacement vendor missed their first shipment, cardiac meds stuck at customs. Doctors are furious. Claire just says, find a workaround." I closed my eyes, remembering how many years it had taken to stabilize those supply lines. Claire didn't understand that logistics wasn't just boxes on trucks. It was trust, timing, lives. "Be careful, Jen," I told her. "Document everything." The silence on the line told me she already was. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with Marcus from MedXL. "We just heard through the grapevine, Westbridge is scrambling. Their hospital accounts are calling around, looking for backup vendors. This could be our window." His voice brimmed with excitement. For him, it was opportunity. For me, it was vindication. Every short-sighted decision Claire made was pushing clients right into our arms. The next drama came at St. Mary's Hospital Network. Karen O'Neill, their purchasing manager, and an old friend of mine, left me a voicemail that sounded like both a confession and a warning. "Linda, I don't know what's happening at Westbridge, but their team missed 2 deliveries this week. Claire doesn't return calls. The board's asking me for options, and I thought of you. Are you really at Medexcel now?" I played that message twice, my chest tight. Karen had trusted me for over a decade. If she was asking, it meant St. Mary's was considering jumping ship, but it wasn't just about missed shipments. Anna, my daughter, brought me another piece of the puzzle. One night she slid her laptop across my kitchen table, eyes sharp under the glow of the screen. "Mom, you need to see this." Anonymous tip. Internal Westbridge email chains. I scrolled. Reading Claire's words, cold, transactional. Promises of restructuring savings in exchange for vendor flexibility. It was a polite way of saying kickbacks. Claire wasn't just arrogant. She was dirty. Anna leaned back, arms crossed. "If I publish this, Westbridge goes down. But I want to be sure." I met her eyes. "Then dig deeper. Don't stop until you have the whole story." The tension grew heavier each day. Calls trickled in from former colleagues. David Chen admitted, "She's firing anyone with more than 10 years here. Says they're resistant to change. But nobody knows how to handle compliance. It's a nightmare." I pictured Claire, all confidence and spreadsheets, drowning in problems she couldn't quantify. It should have felt sweet, but it felt unfinished. Then came the FDA audit. Jennifer's voice trembled when she told me, "They bombed it, Linda." Claire didn't know what to say when the inspector asked about the Henderson protocol. She just stared at him. We got an official warning. I nearly laughed, bitter, sharp. That protocol had saved us countless times. Claire thought it was just a phrase. She didn't know it was a dance, an art. Now the company was paying the price. Twist piled on twist. Anna called me after a long night at her newsroom. "Mom, the vendor Claire signed with? They're already under federal investigation for fraud. If this connects, it won't just be a scandal, it could be criminal." Her voice shook, but not with fear, with excitement. She smelled blood in the water, and like any good reporter, she was circling. By then, Claire must have felt the noose tightening, because one evening my phone lit up with her number. For a long moment, I stared at it, thumb hovering. Then I answered, my tone flat. "Linda, it's Claire. Look, I know things have been rough. The audit was a mess. Clients are restless. I think maybe we could use your guidance as a consultant." Her words tasted like ashes, even through the line. "You let me go because I was too senior," I said evenly. Silence stretched. "That was business," she whispered. "This is survival." For a heartbeat, I almost pitied her. Almost. But then I remembered the sterile boardroom, her smirk, her cold dismissal of 24 years. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "I'm busy, Claire. Good luck." And I hung up. That was the moment I knew we had crossed the point of no return. She was grasping at the very lifeline she had once cut, and I was no longer interested in saving her. The weeks after Claire's desperate phone call felt like watching a storm gather. One by one, the warning signs stacked higher, louder, impossible to ignore. Jennifer finally quit. She left me a message before she packed up her desk. "Linda, I couldn't do it anymore. Every day felt like patching a sinking ship while Claire drilled new holes. She doesn't care. She just smiles for the board." Her voice cracked. "But I want you to know you were the reason I lasted as long as I did." I listened twice, my chest aching with pride and anger. Claire had taken one of my brightest protégées and burned her out in months. St. Mary's was next. Karen called again, this time without the measured diplomacy of a purchasing manager. "We had a patient surgery delayed because of missing supplies. This isn't a joke anymore, Linda. I can't wait around for Westbridge to get its act together. If Medexcel can deliver, I'm ready to move contracts." Her tone was sharp, decisive. I felt the weight of it, 24 years of my work sliding away from Westbridge and into my hands. Claire thought clients were commodities. She forgot they were relationships, built one phone call, one late-night delivery, one personal visit at a time. And those relationships were still mine. Meanwhile, Anna was digging deeper. One Saturday afternoon, she walked into my kitchen with a flash drive. "Mom, I have it. Proof." She plugged it into my laptop, and there it was: emails, spreadsheets, invoices, Claire's backroom deals with the vendor spelled out in black and white, payments routed through shell accounts, promises of exclusive contracts in exchange for personal kickbacks. I leaned back in my chair, the fluorescent kitchen light buzzing above us. "If you publish this," I started. Anna cut me off. "I know, but it's bigger than you and her. This is corruption. It needs to come out." I stared at my daughter, my quiet, stubborn girl, who had once been so shy she could barely speak up in class. Now she was sharper than any blade I'd ever seen. "Do it carefully," I told her. "The truth deserves the right timing." The pressure reached a breaking point during the Houston Industry Conference. MedExcel had rented a modest booth. Nothing flashy, just a clean banner, a few smiling staff, and me, standing in the background like a ghost resurrected. Whispers spread the moment I arrived. Executives craned their necks, murmuring, "Is that Linda Harper? With MedExcel?" Claire showed up the next morning, flanked by assistants, her smile stretched thin. For one brittle moment, our eyes met across the exhibit hall. She faltered. I didn't. I simply turned, shook hands with a potential client, and let the whispers spread. By lunch, 3 vendors had approached me privately. By dinner, 2 hospital reps had scheduled meetings. Claire's face tightened each time she saw someone peel away from her orbit and step into mine. Then came the audit fallout. Word reached me through David Chen. Westbridge had officially failed compliance. The FDA issued a formal sanction, making headlines in trade publications. For hospitals, this wasn't just bad press, it was a red flag. No hospital wanted its supply chain tainted with regulatory issues. Claire tried to spin it, but the spin collapsed under the weight of reality. Contracts were reconsidered. Calls went unanswered. The silence of abandoned clients echoed louder than any press release. And then, the final twist. One evening, Anna burst into my Denver office, her cheeks flushed with adrenaline. "Mom, they're investigating Claire. Federal. Fraud charges. This isn't just rumor anymore." She dropped her bag on the desk, her eyes glittering. "Westbridge executives are panicking. Frank Davis is trying to distance himself. They're drowning." My stomach twisted. Not in guilt, not in pity, but in recognition. Claire had thought she could slice me out of the company like a tumor. Instead, she had infected it herself. That night, I sat alone in the MedExcel office. Lights dimmed, Denver skyline glowing outside the window. The hum of distant traffic drifted up, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. I thought about 24 years sleepless nights, canceled holidays, saving people who would never know my name. I thought about Claire's smug face, the way she tapped her manicured nails when she said, "Fresh blood." I thought about Anna, her pen sharper than any sword, and I realized the moment had arrived. Claire had set the stage herself. Bad contracts, failed audits, betrayed clients, corrupt deals. All I had to do was stand still and let gravity do the rest. The point of no return had come, and I was no longer just defending myself. I was preparing for the strike that would end her. The morning of the climax began like any other, ordinary in its quietness. I was in Denver, sipping coffee in MedExcel's glass-walled conference room, reviewing supply chain projections, when Marcus rushed in holding his phone. His face was pale, his voice urgent. "Linda, you need to see this." He placed the phone in front of me. The subject line glared like a siren. "St. Mary's Hospital Network, official notice of termination with Westbridge Medical Logistics." My heart thudded once, hard. I clicked open the email. It wasn't just a termination letter. It was a manifesto. "To whom it may concern," it began. "After repeated compliance failures and unacceptable service disruptions, St. Mary's Hospital Network has made the decision to end our 20-year partnership with Westbridge Medical Logistics. Effective immediately, we are transitioning our entire network to MedExcel Logistics, under the leadership of COO Linda Harper. We commend Ms. Harper's integrity, decades of proven experience, and the operational excellence we have already witnessed in her new role. It is our strong belief that leadership rooted in knowledge and history is essential to patient safety and healthcare reliability." The words blurred for a moment. My throat tightened. Karen hadn't just ended a contract. She had written my revenge into an open letter, and she hadn't sent it privately. This email was CC'd to nearly every major hospital purchasing department, vendors, and industry regulators across the Southwest. It was a detonation, broadcast for maximum impact. By noon, the letter was everywhere. Trade publications reposted it. LinkedIn exploded with chatter. Is this the end of Westbridge? How did they let Linda Harper go? Screenshots swirled through group chats like wildfire. In Houston, Dallas, Phoenix, every logistics insider was reading Karen's words. At 12:30, my phone rang. It was Frank Davis, Executive VP at Westbridge. His voice was gravel, strained with panic. Linda, please. You have to talk to me. We're bleeding out. Morrison, Farm Corp, and now Street Marys. Everyone's calling. Claire's been suspended pending investigation. The board is demanding answers. I let the silence stretch, the Denver skyline shimmering outside my window. Finally, I said quietly, Frank, you made your choice when you let Claire gut the company. You believed numbers over people. Now you're living with that. Please, Linda, he pressed. Come back. Consult. Anything. We can pay. No, I cut in. My voice was ice. You don't need me. You need to understand what you destroyed. Good luck. And I hung up. At the same time, Anna was in the newsroom, her article already drafted. She had timed it perfectly to drop just as the letter spread. The headline screamed across the business section. Westbridge Medical implodes. Fraud, compliance failures, and the fall of a rising star CEO. Her exposé laid out everything: the leaked emails of Claire's kickbacks, the disastrous audit, the insider exodus. She didn't name me as her source, but she didn't need to. Everyone in the industry already knew the shadow behind the storm. By late afternoon, MedExcel's booth at the Houston conference was mobbed. Vendors, hospital reps, competitors, they all crowded, shaking my hand, slipping me cards, asking about partnerships. Marcus and Stephanie scrambled to keep up with inquiries, eyes wide with disbelief. Linda, Marcus whispered in my ear between meetings. This is insane. We just doubled our pipeline in 6 hours. I stood calm, the hum of the conference like thunder around me, the scent of perfume and coffee mingling in the packed hall. Across the floor, I saw Claire. Her hair was immaculate, her blazer crisp, but her face was ghost white. She clutched her phone like a lifeline, her assistants scattered like frightened birds. For a moment, her eyes met mine. There was no arrogance left, no smug tapping of manicured nails, just raw, naked fear. She mouthed something, maybe help, maybe why, but I didn't move. I turned back to Karen, who was smiling as she signed a preliminary deal with MedExcel. That was my answer. Later, alone in my Denver office, I allowed myself the smallest smile, the kind soldiers wear after surviving a battle. Not triumphant, but cold, knowing. The revenge wasn't a dagger to the heart. It was a mirror held up to Claire and Westbridge, forcing them to see what they'd done. They had wanted fresh blood. Now they were hemorrhaging. The industry had spoken. Clients had spoken. My daughter had spoken through the press. And I had barely lifted a finger. As the sun dipped over the Rockies, painting the sky in streaks of fire and violet, I whispered to myself, they thought they buried me. But they didn't know I was the root. The storm didn't end with that letter. If anything, it was only the first wave. By the following week, MedExcel was inundated with calls clients Westbridge had held for decades, suddenly wanted to explore options. Some of them were people I had personally built relationships with 20 years ago. Others had never spoken to me directly, but they had heard the story. They knew the name. And in this industry, reputation spreads faster than any marketing campaign. Sitting at my desk one quiet evening, the Denver skyline glowing outside, I scrolled through my inbox. Requests for meetings, invitations to panels, even whispers from competitors who wanted to defect. My phone buzzed again, another message. This one from a major hospital network in Chicago. They wanted MedExcel to bid on their national contract, something Westbridge had chased unsuccessfully for years. It was happening exactly as I had foreseen. Claire's obsession with fresh blood had blinded her to the truth. In logistics, trust is the real currency. You can't cut costs on relationships. You can't automate instinct. And once trust is broken, it doesn't just vanish quietly. It turns into a weapon for someone else to use. I thought of Claire then. Suspended, her reputation shredded, facing questions she couldn't spreadsheet her way out of. Maybe she still believed she'd recover, that she could spin her way back into favor. But she didn't understand the kind of damage she had invited. Not yet, because what she didn't know was that Anna's article wasn't the only piece waiting to drop. My daughter had more documents, recordings, whispered testimonies from vendors who had finally found the courage to speak. She was sitting on a story that could expose not just Claire, but the entire executive tier of Westbridge. And I wasn't going to stop her. I leaned back in my chair, letting the thought settle like a secret flame. Claire and Westbridge thought firing me was the end. They thought I would disappear quietly into retirement, another too senior casualty. Instead, I had become the very thing they feared most. Proof that experience isn't just survival, it's power. They thought they'd closed my chapter, I murmured to myself, watching the city lights flicker. But this is only the prologue. If you've ever felt discarded, underestimated, or told you were too old or too much, then you know exactly what I went through. But trust me, your story isn't finished yet. Mine certainly isn't. Westbridge may have thought they erased me, but all they did was sharpen me. And now, with MedExcel, with my daughter's pen, with the truth finally on our side, this fight is only beginning. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family or your own career, subscribe. This story isn't over. Not by a long shot.